Okay, forget everything you thought you knew about the Book of Job. I know it's super easy to just picture it as this dusty, ancient poem about a guy who loses everything and just sits around complaining. But what if I told you that chapters 29 through 31 are actually the climax of a high-stakes civil trial? Seriously, in this explainer, we're going to dive into what is basically the ultimate legal thriller. It's this incredible masterstroke where a mere mortal actually attempts to completely corner the creator of the universe. Okay, let's dive into this and see exactly how a desperate plaintiff builds his case. So, here's our trial docket for today's explainer. Number 1, we'll look at Job's past glory versus his present pain. Number 2, the appeasement equation. 3, Job's daring oath of innocence. And finally, number 4, God as a chaos creature.
Now, if you take a look at the speech count in the discourse section, the numbers can honestly be a little bit misleading. You see Elihu with 4 speeches, Job with 3, and Yahweh with 2. Because of this kind of weird offsetting pattern, Elihu almost looks like the main speaker. But make no mistake, the true focal point, the absolute linchpin of this entire legal battle, rests squarely on Job's 3 crucial speeches. So today we are focusing entirely on Job's strategy.
Section 1. Past glory and present pain. The trial begins.
Job kicks things off in chapter 29 by setting the scene of, well, the good old days. He's remembering the coherence of his past. Back then, the retribution principle worked perfectly. You know, good behavior was rewarded, bad behavior was punished, he feared God, he was doing great, and life just made sense. But then, chapter 30 crashes into the incoherence of his present. Job isn't just a guy sitting quietly by a dung pile feeling sorry for himself. He is actively out around town, being despised, rejected, and completely ostracized by his own community. His present reality is absolute chaos, and he is desperately searching for a way to get back to that coherence.
Section 2. The appeasement equation. The friend solution.
So Job's friends come along and offer him a very specific path to get his life back together, and it's rooted in this ancient worldview called the Great Symbiosis. Let's define what that is. It's basically the idea of appeasement acting as an all-purpose equilibrator. The logic goes a little something like this. If God is angry at you, it means his needs aren't being met. So you just meet his needs, you appease him, and in return, he restores your prosperity and brings your world back into balance. This was the total standard in the ancient Near East. Just pay the fine, appease the deity, and get your stuff back. But here is the crucial point. If Job actually takes his friend's advice and uses appeasement to get his life back, he has to adopt self-interested righteousness. It becomes all about the perks, right? Acting good just to get his stuff back. But Job flat out refuses to do this. He insists his righteousness is entirely disinterested. He's not acting righteously just to get wealthy. He is doing it simply because it's the right thing to do. He cares about actual justice, not just padding his bank account.
Section 3. The oath of innocence. Job's masterstroke.
To really grasp Job's play here, we have to understand his immense frustration. Remember, Job views himself as a desperate plaintiff in a civil trial, and he is seeking restitution. He's been begging for God to enter the courtroom, to engage in the conversation, maybe provide a mediator. But what does he get? Absolute deafening silence. And in the ancient world, if you're suffering terribly and the deity refuses to even speak to you, your community automatically assumes you're out of favor and are being rightfully punished. So God's silence is literally destroying Job's reputation.
So let's look at how this builds into Job's master legal trap. This is brilliant. Job decides to weaponize God's silence. Here is his 3-step strategy. Step 1, he swears this massive, comprehensive oath covering almost every conceivable crime you could commit against God or society. Step 2, he demands that God strike him dead if he's actually guilty of any of it. He just throws the ball entirely into God's court, trying to force his hand. But here is the absolute genius of step 3. If God remains silent, you know, the very silence that has been torturing Job this whole time, Job can now use that silence to claim automatic vindication. If God doesn't strike him dead, boom, he is exonerated. It is such an incredibly clever manipulation of divine silence.
And we really need to pause here and highlight why this matters. Look at what Job is actually trying to win. He knows full well that this legal maneuver isn't going to magically restock his sheep or rebuild his houses. This is entirely about reclaiming his righteous status in the community. Job is basically building a fort in his own corner. He wants his reputation vindicated, and he wants his claim to disinterested righteousness upheld, even if it means he stays completely broke. Section 4. God as a chaos creature. The terrifying cost. Now, if Job's strategy actually works and he forces this vindication, we really need to look at the collateral damage. Job has essentially decided that his own personal righteousness is more important than God's reputation. Think about it. If Job wins this confrontation, God's policies of how the world is run are entirely dismantled. God's reputation is left in shambles. Ultimately, God is reduced to just a powerful being who possesses neither wisdom nor justice. To really grasp the irony of all this, we have to look back at the very beginning of Job's speeches. Remember back in chapter 3? Job offered this incredibly bitter lament, essentially crying out to God, "Why are you treating me like a chaos creature?" He felt like he was being hunted down, punished for no reason, basically treated like an embodiment of chaos rather than a faithful servant.
And wow, does this bring us to the ultimate reversal of the trial. In chapter 3, Job felt treated as a chaos creature. But by chapter 31, with this super aggressive oath of innocence, Job has totally turned the tables. Now Job is treating God as the chaos creature. By forcing God into this legal paradox, Job is basically painting the creator of the universe as an irrational, unjust force that has to be managed through legal loopholes.
We really have to understand the massive stakes here. If Job wins this way, it's actually worse than if he had just caved and listened to his friends. If he had listened to them, God would have just been reduced to your typical ancient Near Eastern deity who trades blessings for appeasement. But Job's accusation goes so much deeper than that. It threatens to make God, well, no God at all. In a very real sense, Job's legal trap threatens to do way more damage to God's reputation and his cosmic policies than the original challenger ever did at the start of the book. So here we are. Job has played his final card. He's spoken his oath, he has dared the heavens to strike him down, and he has put the reputation of the creator of the universe completely on the line. The mortal has literally cornered the divine. The courtroom is completely silent. But you really have to ask yourself, with God's reputation hanging in the balance, a threat far greater than any faced so far, how exactly will the creator respond to this unprecedented legal trap? Well, that is a question that leaves us perfectly primed for the profound discourses that follow.